Good afternoon, or good noon. Welcome. My name is David Hart. I teach at the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University, and I'm a senior fellow at ITIF. ITIF is a science and technology focused think tank here in Washington, D.C. Today we're here to talk about the national labs, which Secretary Perry has rightly called the national treasure. But the nation and its challenges are evolving, and the labs also need to evolve. So we're here today to explore a couple of ideas that would move them in that direction. We're going to hear first from three members of Congress, Representative Hultgren, Representative Fleischman, and Representative Lujan. Then we'll have a panel discussion, and we'll have some time at the end for questions, so please keep those in mind. I also want to briefly recognize a number of co-sponsors for this event. Third Way. So these are groups with diverse perspectives, but they really share an interest in sustaining this conversation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our one of our co-sponsors, Drew Bond, who is, what is his title? Senior Fellow and Director of Energy Innovation Programs at the American Council for Capital Formation, and he's going to introduce Representative Hultgren.
Great. Thank you, David. And thank you all for being here. It's exciting to see so many familiar faces, so it's a little bit like a homecoming for me. So as David mentioned, my name is Drew Bond. I'm the Senior Fellow and Director of Energy Innovation Programs at the American Council for Capital Formation. A little bit about ACCF. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. For more than 4 decades, we've served as a liaison between Washington's leading policymakers, the media, and business. And we're proud to really have a history of hosting forums and public discussions with members of the media, members of Congress, both sides of the aisle, and business executives to talk about some of the most important and pressing issues of our time. And we're particularly interested in those things that we see as forming capital, as in our name, the American Council for Capital Formation. So things like taxes and regulations, energy and the environment, and other economic policies that ultimately result in investment. I also have another job, which is CEO of Powerfield Energy, which is a startup solar company. We have a product made in America that allows for any solar system to be installed with no tools, no concrete, and no steel. Ultimately, it just makes solar simpler, faster, easier, and cheaper. And I can tell you from experience that this bill that these members of Congress have introduced and that we're here to talk about today really will have an impact, because in 2017, Powerfield Energy applied for a small business voucher with the Department of Energy, specifically through NREL. That program at the time was actually underfunded and oversubscribed. I'm proud to say that we still found a way to work with NREL, but I can tell you as a CEO of a startup that raising capital is very hard, if not impossible, at these very early stages. So to be able to access the labs, either with your own technology or taking technologies and transferring them from the labs to the market, is really critical for ensuring that our investments of taxpayers make it to the market. So with that, let me just say thank you, Congressman Lujan, Congressman Fleischman, and Congressman Randy Hultgren, who I get to introduce. So he said to keep it short. I might have it a little bit longer than he expected, but let me hit some highlights. So Congressman Randy Hultgren is he's a respected leader on science and technology and innovation policy. He represents Illinois' 14th district in Congress, comprised of the counties surrounding Chicago. He serves on the Financial Services and Science, Space, and Technology Committees, and is co-founder and co-chair of the Science and National Labs Caucus, co-chair of the STEM Education Caucus, and co-founder and co-chair of the Prize Caucus. He's been at the forefront of spearheading a broad spectrum of legislative reforms, everything from promoting exascale computing to advancing tech transfer, from basic science research capabilities of our national labs all the way to ensuring that we are preparing the next generation of scientists and engineers. He's launched the STEM Scholars Leadership Program that I wish I was a part of when I was younger. It mentors high school students one-on-one with scientific, educational, business, and manufacturing leaders. He's a professed recovering lawyer, That's what I respect most about him. And committed to physically responsible policies and pro-growth policies that help American small businesses grow. He's a graduate from Bethel College, Chicago Kent College of Law, resides in Plano, Illinois. He's married to Christy with 4 kids, and when he's not busy beating his kids at Clash of Clans, he's reading up on the latest gadgets and following the advances of autonomous vehicles. Please help me in welcoming Congressman Hart.
Thank you, Drew. I'm going to have you send that to my mom. She reads my Facebook pages, and she gets a little concerned of who I am and what I'm doing. So I keep telling her, don't read Facebook, whatever you do, at least not the comments part. But thank you, Drew. Thank you, all of you. So good to be with my great friends. Ben Ray Lujan is awesome, just such a passionate worker along with us for our labs, and Chuck Fleischman is amazing, tireless worker, advocate for this treasure. I absolutely agree with Secretary Perry that our national labs are a treasure that we have to embrace, we have to recognize, we have to continue to talk about, and never forget that it's not an accident, the discoveries that we enjoy, the benefits that we enjoy, and as Drew said, the formation of new companies that make all of our lives better, that comes out of great research that so oftentimes started in our laboratories. And also have to remember how this all fits together, that our labs do such great work, but also are reaching out and working with our universities. And I see it, I represent Fermilab, and every single year, at least 39,000 students, K through 12, are impacted by Fermilab, either coming to Fermilab or having scientists and physicists going out to their schools, or having teachers come in to be trained and equipped to better inspire their own students. So many good things that happen, along with wonderful business opportunities that come out of our laboratories. So I love working with you guys and just excited about the future and what can happen there. Also, Ben and I have been working recently to create an energy foundation similar to the foundation for NIH, where private capital can be used for promising new energy research. So I think that'll be a great thing that we can keep pushing. I'm also excited. Today's a big day. We're going to have the Nimble Act up on the floor this afternoon. I expect to get great, strong bipartisan support. This is something that we've been working on. It really came from the work of ITIF and the work on the DOE Labs Modernization Act, which the House passed without any opposition in previous Congress. Nimble Act removes some of the bureaucratic hurdles for us to be able to get important projects moving through our laboratories. And again, grateful for Secretary Perry's work on this as well, but want to make sure that labs can enter into smaller agreements with the private sector without going through a 60 to 90-day review period that so many times we don't have that time. The opportunity is quick, it's short, we've got to respond quickly, and so I'm excited that the Nimble Act is going to be up this afternoon on the House floor, and looking forward to a strong bipartisan vote as we see that. And again, I just think on so many different levels, our labs are so vital, certainly to our economy, to new businesses that are going to be starting and growing because of it, but also to inspiring that next generation of scientists, of engineers, of leaders. And I do, as Drew mentioned, one of my favorite things I get to do is my STEM Scholars program. We started up a couple of years ago, where I meet with high school students selected from around the 7 counties that I represent. It's the entire school year. We meet once a month and go to different locations around northern Illinois to see application of STEM fields right there in northern Illinois. I also want to learn from them of what was it that sparked your interest, and what can we take that you benefited from and maybe get in another school or get to younger students. I think high school students are so important, but I think oftentimes we're missing students if we just wait till high school. We really do have to be making sure we're inspiring and equipping them and lighting that spark in middle school and grade school. So our laboratories are a great place for that to happen. We had our STEM scholars out to Fermilab not too long ago and had an awesome tour and great questions. My secret ambition out of all of this is for us to keep our best and brightest young people in Illinois, in the Midwest, a part of the great work that's happening, telling them the great stories of how privileged we are, how fortunate we are to have 2 national laboratories in Illinois, along with great universities right there, along with some of the fastest computers anywhere in the world. So we got a great story to tell. But I just want to, again, thank you all for coming today. I know it's busy times, I know a lot is happening, but this is important, and it is something that brings us together. Too many things divide us. Our laboratories and discovery and research and the benefits that it can bring to all of our lives is something that absolutely does bring us together. So thank you for taking the time. Any way we can be helpful ever, please let us know. With that, thank you so much.
So I also get the honor of introducing Congressman Chuck Fleischman. And so we'll just say a few words about his bio. I think, as many of you know, he is from the 3rd District of Tennessee. And he received his undergraduate degree in political science from the University of Illinois, where he was esteemed to earn both Phi Beta Kappa and magna cum laude honors. He then went to the University of Tennessee Law School, where he received his Doctor of Jurisprudence. For 24 years, Chuck and his wife ran a small business together, very apropos for today's topic. And in Chattanooga, after they both graduated from law school at the University of Tennessee. He served on a number of boards, including the Cherokee Area Council and Boy Scouts of America. He served as president of the Chattanooga Bar Association and chairman of the Chattanooga Lawyers Pro Bono Committee. He serves on the appropriations committees, which obviously is very vital for the work that we do here around investing in energy innovation and tech transfer, so thank you for that service. And a number of subcommittees, including energy and water development, Homeland Security, Labor, HHS, and education. Congressman Fleischman and his wife Brenda live in Ooltewah, Tennessee, and they have 3 sons. So please help me in welcoming Congressman Fleischman.
Thank you. Ooltewah is a suburb of the greatest mid-sized city in America, Chattanooga, Tennessee. And the reason I say that, I love Chattanooga, but another great city in my district, Oak Ridge, has really made me a national congressman. Oak Ridge is a major DOE reservation. We have the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which is an outstanding national lab run by my alma mater, the University of Tennessee, and a great company by the name of Battelle. And I see our great friends from Battelle here as well, so thank you for the job that you all do. We have the Y-12 plant there, and we're building the uranium processing facility. It's an NNSA facility as well. And we have a great cleanup mission there. We do a tremendous job there, which leads me to talk about my colleagues first and foremost. You heard from Congressman Holmgren, who comes from one of my states, my former state, Illinois, does a tremendous, tremendous job advocating for our national labs. And my dear friend, Congressman Lujan from New Mexico. Congressman is my co-chair on the Nuclear Cleanup Caucus, and that is something I'm very passionate about. He has Los Alamos, I have Oak Ridge. We know that we have legacy sites all across America that have got to be cleaned up, and when we clean them up, we do very well. As a matter of fact, at some of our lab sites, we have cleanup missions that need to be accomplished, and we're getting that done. So it all comes together. Congressman Lujan, thank you for being my partner, my advocate, and we work so well together, and you do such an outstanding job for Los Alamos, but really across the DOE spectrum. So it's an honor to be with you today, sir. Want to talk about ORNL a little bit. What is so special about ORNL? What's so special about our national labs? And then I'm going to have an ask. You have to be lucky to have a national lab in your district. You heard Congressman Holmgren. He's got Fermi, and I think Argonne is not too far away. And Ben Ray has Los Alamos. Our national labs are very special. Oak Ridge National Laboratory. When I went to Congress, we were first in the world in supercomputing. A couple of months ago, we were 5th in the world in supercomputing. We are now #1 in the world because of the Summit computer at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. That is still a petaflops computer, but that drive to exascale is something that we need to be involved in, and our national labs are very active in that regard. We have the spallation neutron source, the SNS, which was one of a kind, and now we're actually building a second phase of the spallation neutron source. Hot cell research. I mean, we do so much in our national labs that is tremendous, and we collaborate. I think that's very important. Obviously, ORNL is much more of a science lab. Some of our national labs have more of a national defense focus, but they're all very special, and they all have a key role. One of the things that I'm almost as passionate about as my Nuclear Cleanup Caucus is our National Labs Caucus. And I want to talk with you all about that today, because we do three Nuclear Cleanup Caucus events every year. And we take a room like this, there'll be standing room only. We literally have to turn folks away. So Ben Ray and John Shimkus and all the folks come on down, and we talk about cleaning up legacy sites. It is one of the fastest growing caucuses in Congress. It's very important. It's bipartisan and really bicameral. These should not be issues that parties should get involved in. And I think if we think about the National Labs Caucus, my fervent hope is that we can actually have an event this year where we can highlight all the national labs and do that. So we're going to work towards that and would want you to be a part of that. I serve on the Appropriations Committee. Good news. The House has done its work again, and we've passed an energy and water bill. Even better news, the Senate has finally done its job, and they've passed an energy and water bill. The best news is that we're going to be going to conference soon. We're going to be able to work this out. What does that mean? Key funding for all the initiatives that our authorizers and other people want to get done, that you want to see get done in a very robust way. As you know, we've been blessed in 2018. We're going to do very well in 2019. I don't know what the future holds, but I certainly hope that as appropriators and as members of both parties in the House, we can get behind our national labs and fund them to do the missions that are so important. In closing, I want to thank you all for coming out, for the sponsors today. And bear this in mind, America is leading the world in research, and our national labs, partnering with businesses, small businesses, mid-sized businesses, and large businesses, is a way that we can continue to do that, to take that technology that we develop there and actually make sure that that technology leads America in this century. It is truly outstanding. I welcome you to come at some point in time to visit ORNL. I'm a little bit biased. I think it's the premier national lab. I know my distinguished colleague might have that, but if Mike Simpson was here, he'd have something to say as well. But thank you for your hard work. It's an honor to be with you today. And Minsu Crowder is my staffer here. She does all my DOE work. Please feel free to reach out with her. And I look forward to being with you all at our National Labs Caucus event that we want to have in either September or sometime later this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Fleischman. Really appreciate your leadership in this area and joining us today. And now I'm going to turn over the microphone briefly to Ryan Fitzpatrick. He is the Deputy Director of the Clean Energy Program at Third Way, and he will introduce Representative Lujan.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. As David said, I'm Ryan Fitzpatrick, and I'm with Third Way. We are a center-left think tank here in Washington. I'm the Deputy Director of our Clean Energy Program, and our mission is to promote the policies that are going to make drastic cuts to greenhouse gas emissions so we can fight climate change. And we know that innovation, especially with the support of the federal government, through labs, through DOE, is going to be a vital component of achieving that mission. So it's an honor to be here at this event, and thanks to ITIF for being the main organizer. And it's also a privilege to introduce the next speaker, Congressman Ben Ray Lujan. Since 2009, Congressman Lujan has represented New Mexico's 3rd District, which is home to Los Alamos and the next-door neighbor, very close next-door neighbor to Sandia. So he has plenty of experience and access working with the national labs. By the time the congressman got here to Washington, he was already one of the more experienced members when it comes to energy policy, having been the chair of New Mexico's Public Regulation Commission, where he advocated for a lot of new and clean energy solutions for the state and for the region as a whole. Here in Washington, the congressman has been a very active member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and he's continued to advocate for renewable and clean energy sources, as well as for innovation supported by federal resources. In 2011, the congressman was a founder of the Technology Transfer Caucus, which is designed to help move some of the phenomenal innovations that are happening in the labs out into the marketplace. He's also, as Congressman Holmgren mentioned, Congressman Lujan has been very active and a champion and for legislation to increase private sector investment in energy innovation through a foundation model, which is something that's been done in several other fields of science, but not in the energy world. And it's something that's been proven to be very effective and that we think we could learn from and benefit from here in this sector. These members have also partnered on other pieces of legislation, including grants that can help small businesses access the national labs and the tremendous resources we have there, and make more use of the equally tremendous resources that we have from our innovative private sector culture. Finally, I would say the congressman's focus has also been on making sure that we have the right workforce to succeed in energy innovation. It's not just about getting the right materials, the right infrastructure. We have to have the people who have the right training. And ideally, we'd like for those people to come from right here, from home. So the congressman has been very engaged in trying to promote apprenticeship programs and other technical training programs that will give us the expertise that we need and help train Americans to do the jobs that we want them to do here in the U.S. So I won't take any longer. I'd like to welcome Congressman Ben Ray Lujan to the podium.
Well, good morning, everyone. And Ryan, thank you for that kind introduction. Professor Hart, thank you for all the work that you have been doing. And so as to not repeat much of what has been said by both Randy and Chuck, I will simply say I associate myself with their remarks as well. Look, I know it's not customary when you see members from opposite parties highlighting the work of people that we work with on the other side of the aisle. Randy and Chuck are two examples of how we work together. These are important pieces of legislation that we've partnered on. We both represent, or all three of us represent different national labs. We may disagree on who the premier institution is in the country, but we all agree that each of us represent premier institutions in America and around the world. I often describe our national labs, especially the leadership coming out of Los Alamos National Laboratory, that anytime you see something that's concerning or challenging around the world, someone from our labs are there trying to figure out what's happening, trying to make things better. When you hear about some extraordinary find or something new that is going to be revolutionary, that is going to make things better, someone from one of our national labs also had a hand in that discovery. These are untapped resources, I would say, even though we depend on them so very much. But especially when it comes to economic opportunities and job opportunities around America, we should be tapping more into our national labs, including our 3 NNSA facilities across America, 2 of which happen to be in New Mexico, as Chuck pointed out. What I will maybe just add today is first, as I want to recognize all of the sponsors today, and they have been recognized, but these partnerships are critically important, and many of you are part of the organization. So first, again, to Professor Hart, to the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, the American Council for Capital Formation, the Bipartisan Policy Center, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and Third Way for bringing us together. Important partnerships as we talk about how we can come together for more opportunities, but be more responsible with how we do them. The Impact for Energy Act, which was highlighted by Randy, is a bipartisan bicameral bill. The idea here being that as we've looked at those innovations with those foundations in other areas, as Ryan pointed out, we asked the question, why isn't this happening with the Department of Energy or our national labs? It's worked, it's been successful. How can we make sure that we're looking for more opportunities, especially with access to capital, as we look at commercialization in the 21st century? And that's what this is about. I'm excited by the fact that it is bipartisan and bicameral, and that we're finding a way to get this done. We need your help to push this across the finish line, though. So as you're visiting with other U.S. senators, with other groups, please include this legislation in your priorities. We'd be happy to work with you to make sure that there's a full understanding of how this bill will make a difference across the country, especially as we look at emerging opportunities. And then the second one that I would highlight that wasn't talked about was promoting small business innovation through partnerships with national labs. There's been a few pilot projects that we've seen different labs benefit from through these important innovation vouchers, where it's, again, an access to capital question that we're trying to solve. And so to address the problem, the Department of Energy has been experimenting with these programs, including the Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear program at Idaho National Laboratory. And these pilot programs award vouchers to small businesses that can be used to leverage expertise. Why would we not partner and bring more people together? As we talk about the importance of tech transfer and what that means. We talked about the Tech Transfer Caucus, the Cleanup Caucus, the National Lab Caucus. There's a reason why you see some of the same members that are instrumental in what is being done in those spaces. Again, to highlight the work of Randy and Chuck. It's a place where the politics is taken out. The partisan disagreements do not exist. We're about solving problems and seeing how we can better move this. So I just want to thank you all for what you are doing. So not to monopolize the time of the panel, but your voices are critically important. We need your expertise. We need your advocacy. We need you to make sure that we continue to find bipartisan and bicameral ways to move these pieces of legislation during tough times as well. I do want to introduce a couple of my team members who are here. Levi, who is here to my right, Randy Flores. Randy's there to the back to the left, my left. Please make sure that you get a chance to get to know them, work with them in our offices, and look forward to getting to know those of you that I've not had the honor of working with. Thank you for being here, for taking time out of your busy days, and I look forward to learning from all of you. Let's get these pieces of legislation adopted, and let's continue to make a difference every day that we can. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Representative Lujan. And I do want to thank the staffs that work with these various members for their hard work. And with that, let me invite the panelists to come on up, and we'll start the next portion of the program. And while they're coming up, let me just share a little bit of data on the labs, which is drawn from the annual report. So it's a roughly $14 billion year enterprise with more than 20,000 scientists and engineers, and add to that another 7,000 students and postdocs. So this is a very large repository of expertise for the country. There are 17 of them. You heard about a few of them. They have some of the finest facilities in the world. So our nation is making a big investment, and I think the question is, can we get more from this investment to work towards our national goals without killing the golden goose? So we don't want to undermine the scientific quality of what's going on at the labs, but we do want to take greater advantage of what they have to offer. So there are a couple of ideas that we're going to talk about today. Small business vouchers, and I want to recognize Jetta Wong, who helped put that idea together in its pilot program when she was at the Department of Energy, and the Impact for Energy Foundation. I also want to make a shout out to Stephen Ezel, my colleague at ITIF, who has really been the leader on a number of these issues within ITIF. So we have three great speakers. I will introduce them briefly when I ask them to come up. There's more detailed information about them on our website. And with no further ado, let me bring up Rick Silky. So Rick is the Chief of Government Operations at Nishati, and he'll talk about what they do. They make solar products. Before coming to Nishati, he was with the DOE, and before that was Lieutenant Colonel in the Marine Corps. A graduate, I thought it said U.S. Naval Academy and U.S. Air Force Academy, but it doesn't quite say that. That'd be really impressive. But graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, and thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for the introduction, David, and thank you to ITIF for the opportunity to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, as he said, Rick Silky with Nishati Incorporated, a small business. Let me bring up my slides. Do I need to cue that, or?
Yeah, just press the right hand. Yep,
Okay, there we go. So we're a small business headquartered in McLean, Virginia. We got our start in 2014 in Colorado. We actually
evolved out of a company that was developing an SBIR technology, so another great program for small business innovation there, and we're continuing to grow from that point. We are really focused on the off-grid power markets, focused in expertise in solar and making high-performance solar lighter, less complex, so easier to use, ruggedized, and finding solutions to problems. So applying it where it really makes sense to solve a problem. For our core market, which has been Department of Defense, that's very specialized, and there's a lot of challenging, constraints in that environment. So that's kind of forced our start point in our technology to be very specialized, rugged, portable, and as simple as you can make it, but as high performance as you can make it. And now we're in a phase where we're really continuing to block and tackle and do what we do in that space while we look for segues into other markets to diversify. And the Small Business Voucher Program, we saw an opportunity I'll talk about in a minute that to really help us start to bridge to one particular opportunity. So I mentioned that we evolved from an SBIR licensed technology. That was a very light, rugged, portable, monocrystalline silicon solar panel. So the type of solar that typically is relegated to being on the roof or being in a large solar field and requiring a lot of structure, requiring a lot of mass. And we basically evolved an existing system and dramatically reduced the size and volume, the weight and volume of that system to make it more portable, to open up new opportunities to employ it in an expeditionary military environment. And of course, we see the crossover potential for that into things like disaster relief markets and other off-grid markets, at least in the developed world, and then have a goal of eventually evolving those solutions into appropriate fits for developing world. We're not a big company. We stayed very lean. The solar market is difficult for even the big companies, especially as the race to the bottom has occurred in recent years with regards to module prices, and the overall value chain has become more and more competitive. And so we've tried to stay in kind of our core and leverage what we do well, but look for crossover value into these other markets, and this is where SBV comes in. A couple of notes there. We've kind of established ourselves in DOD as the go-to solution for at least a couple of the services. We're in some programs of record, and that's a great start. It's allowed us to then invest internally through independent R&D to continue to develop new IP, and that's what brought us to the SBV program. So next slide, I will get more into that.
You got to get it yourself.
I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. Last point I'll make is we believe in what we're doing because we've seen the value of it in a very challenging environment, expeditionary military operations. Solar and hybrid power has its place there. We see potential for it also in other off-grid scenarios or use cases, whether it be reducing the amount of fuel that you consume or whether it be providing resilience to critical capabilities. The trick is taking these higher-end technologies and bridging that gap or getting across that valley of death into commercialized technology in a cost-effective manner. You can see, I won't read the stats, but those numbers that cited on that slide, on the slide, are based on DOD work from about 2009 to 2013 that showed it in a real-world environment. It showed the value that solar and hybrid can play even in that difficult environment. If we can do it there, we can do it in other places. So what does SBV bring to Nishadi? Why did we get engaged? I've touched on it a little here in the previous slides, but at the end of the day, it's an opportunity for us to work with the experts. Okay, we're working with the pros from Dover at Sandia. Okay, we have a technology that we're taking some of the aspects of our portable systems that we think have value in the commercial space, particularly glass-free solar panels, frameless solar panels that are high-performing, that are lighter weight, and in this case, that are non-reflective. So there's about 120 gigawatts of potential out there, and that's probably a very conservative number of lands that are encumbered due to optical impacts. Okay, think around airports and other places where you'd be concerned about optical impacts. We went to Sandia because Sandia has the expertise. They have developed the authoritative model and database for characterizing the optical impacts of solar systems. And so that was where we kind of started. Obviously, a lot of the study that underpinned this idea also came out of NREL, National Renewable Energy Lab. And that kind of fleshed out the opportunity to the point where it was worth moving forward and doing some innovation on existing technologies that we had incorporated. But to get over the hump and get that into a commercial space, in addition to the engineering and our own innovation, we need the validation. And so Sandia provides the expertise, the analytic capability, the facilities, and of course, ultimately, they're the authoritative source for this data. So if we can validate with them, then we certainly can stake the claim that we are the lowest reflective or non-reflective panel in the market. And therefore, that gives us the potential to get there. And then you certainly still have manufacturability, cost, and other factors to consider to become competitive in that space. But it adds value, and it potentially cost avoids some of the costs that go along with mitigation of those optical impacts. And in a conversation earlier, it may have benefits in terms of reducing weight on panels for solutions that are trying to implement solar on structures that are very weight sensitive or have some weight constraints. It also helps us expand our network, and you kind of get the point that it helps us to diversify in our technology and our markets. One thing I will call out, and I think this is something we've learned as we've gone through this process. You set down a project plan, and it doesn't survive contact, right? The plan goes out the window after day one. Well, after about the first phase of this project, which was about a 3-6 month endeavor, we realized that going into the second phase, we were going to need to take some more time. Again, this goes back to being a small business, trying to do things in low quantity that are kind of pushing the limits of technology. We needed to manage costs to stay within the project. And the great thing was that this program, and Sandia had the flexibility to say, okay, let's take a pause, and we'll come back, and when we've got this figured out, and we'll move forward. And that's what we've done, and now we're moving forward. They have our full modules, and they're in testing at Sandia today. And for us, that was really critical to manage risk, and ultimately to set us up on a path that would be viable when this project's complete to transition to commercialization. So it actually looked like a challenge at the time. It actually improved the ultimate result. And we hope to see the results here soon. And finally, ultimately what this is about is we want to grow as a company, and with that, create jobs and ultimately contribute to national energy independence. And that's where the really big fish is. That's the opportunity that we're ultimately after, is that 120 gigawatts that's out there, some of which can't be tapped, some of it has encumbrances or additional costs associated with it that we can eliminate. And then, of course, there may be new aspects of our technology that are useful as well. Again, helps us get past at least part of the valley of death, if not completely over the valley of death. So we really appreciated the opportunity to be part of this SBV. One of the things I'll say is that for a small business, the cost share, and keeping the ultimate project cost down is important. And we were able to do that, and again, through our internal resources, kind of get through this project. But ultimately, we hope it opens some good doors downstream. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks very much, Rick. So that's one of the ideas. The second is to set up a foundation that would work with the national labs. Whereas there's a pilot program for the small business vouchers, there isn't such a thing for the foundation. But there is a model, at least a potential model, and that's the foundation for NIH. And we have David Walley, who's the Senior Vice President Research Partnerships there, to talk with us. We're not putting him on the spot and asking him to endorse the idea of what should be done with another agency, but just to share his experience and the experience of the NIH Foundation in building partnerships. David joined the foundation in 2006. Before that, he had a long career in the healthcare technology management business. And he did his graduate work at Rutgers and at NYU. And David, thank you for joining us. Great, so just point it there when you're ready to click forward.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. As announced, I'm David Walley. I head the Research Partnerships Group at the Foundation for the NIH. I'll tell you a little bit about us. We've been around for a little over 20 years. First of all, for those of you who are not as familiar with the National Institutes of Health, that is the government agency that we support. This is a $36 billion a year agency. This is the greatest biomedical research institution on the face of the earth. Most of that money goes out to academic institutions, companies, and other healthcare providers in your districts. They have a small internal research program and a small administration budget. And the NIH already has a small business innovation and research program, grants. They support most of the biomedical research that takes place in our academic research centers. Contracts and cooperative research and development agreements, or CRADAs, that they use to jointly develop products with companies. So why do they need to work with the private sector? And why do they need a public-private partnership to advance things? Well, of course, there's the question of money. It costs between $2 and $3 billion to get a drug to market. It can take up to 15 to 20 years of development time. And certainly, there's never enough money to do everything that needs to be done to do research that supports human health. But you know, surprisingly, there are some other reasons why this is important. There was reference earlier to, you know, can we support our national labs in a way that we're, you know, sort of not impairing the expertise and the knowledge that takes place there. And these partnerships actually enhance that knowledge, because one of the big problems in the biomedical research field is that we have way too much knowledge, or way too much information, I say, and not enough knowledge. By 2025, the amount of information we have just on the human genome, just on genetics, not chemicals and diseases and all the other stuff that goes on, will be the largest single source of data in the world. Just to put that in perspective, that means it'll be larger than Twitter and YouTube. But in order to make sense of this, you really have to have collaboration among multiple sectors. The academics can't do it on their own. The government scientists can't figure it out on their own. Even huge companies like Pfizer can't figure it out on their own. And so we really have arrived at a world in which we have to accept the fact that nobody is smarter than everybody, and that we need to get scientists from these multiple disciplines to sit down at the same table and figure out the solutions to these problems. So yes, it's about sharing resources, whether that's money or data. It's about enabling insight and innovation. Sometimes, and in the medical field this is extremely important, it's about establishing consensus and a sense of standards. So everyone is using the same assay or test to determine whether someone has cancer, breast cancer. And wouldn't it be great if that was tested in a robust way and the data was made available so that clinicians then using that test in a hospital have confidence in the results? So these are the kinds of things that are important. It's important to drive competitiveness in the global marketplace. Europe doesn't have an NIH, but they are spending €3 billion a year on something called the Innovative Medicines Initiative, which is designed to mimic what we do here in the U.S., but work with companies to try and make sure that pharmaceutical R&D stays involved in Europe. To reduce costs, to enhance credibility, and of course it's very important to support education and training. We have a rule at the Foundation about partnerships, and it's the most important rule. And that is that if any one entity can already tackle a problem on their own, then there's no need for a partnership. Partnerships really come into play when you need the multiple partners at the table at the same time. So, the FNIH. So for years, there was no way for the NIH to convene these kinds of partnerships, or even to take money from the private sector outside of very narrowly defined federal vehicles in the federal regulation. So we were established through the Public Health Service Act of the Congress, in its wisdom, saw this problem emerging in the 90s, began really operational in 1996, and for the past 22 years have been creating these public-private partnerships between the industry, academia, NIH, FDA, and patient organizations, because the patient is really the ultimate goal for all of us to serve. We were set up as a 501c3, so we're non-government, we're independent. That's extremely important. It gives us objectivity. It allows us to be an effective broker between the private sector and the NIH. NIH can't exactly tell us what to do. We have over 555 projects supported. You can see we have a lot of active research partnerships, and we do a lot of different stuff. We've built buildings on the NIH campus. We support training fellowships and education. But probably most important are these research partnerships around specific problems in multiple disease areas that my group runs, and that my counterpart, Stephanie James, who works with funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, runs for many diseases in the developing world. We've raised over $1 billion since inception. Most of that has been probably in the last 10 to 12 years. We're frighteningly efficient. 93% of our funds go directly to support programs, only 7% to administration. That's about half of what it costs most foundations to run their administration. And we are rated by Charity Navigator, as many of these nonprofits are. We have 15 years of top 4-star ratings from Charity Navigator. We have a variety, as I said, of partnerships. I'm not going to go through all these. I tend to run the ones at the upper left-hand corner. These include an innovative lung cancer trial. They include partnerships to develop biomarkers, new ways of biomarkers, something like blood pressure. It's a way of finding a precise measure of something going on in the body or the effect of a drug. We work with FDA on that. I'll talk a little bit about an example of the Accelerating Medicines Partnership. On the right is a whole bunch of really innovative, cutting-edge science to try and address the issues of health in the developing world. It's run through our group. A lot of the funding for that comes through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And in the middle, a lot of our training programs and some of the events that we put on, conferences and so forth. What do we do? Well, for these partnerships, we will go out and we will help develop them, and we will work with the NIH to select what to work on. But once that has been decided, we will manage governance, so establishing a variety of ways of managing these partnerships that is open and ethical and transparent, but effective. Policy management, so we provide this safe harbor for interactions, make sure that the policy, what we do supports NIH ethical and policy standards. We drive consensus across the stakeholders about what to do. We raise the funds. We can directly solicit contributions from private sector partners. NIH cannot do that. We steward and manage these donor funds, so we report back to the donors on what's going on with their money. An incredibly important thing is project management. We actually, in many cases, are managing these day-to-day efforts. And when you have people who are mostly scientists volunteering their time, having someone in the middle to drive something like this is incredibly important, and intellectual property management where that's required. We really have two kinds of partnership models that form really the ends of a spectrum. We have a saying that if you've seen one partnership, you've seen one partnership. But really, if money comes into the NIH, if you look at the two ends of the spectrum, one is that we can take all the money and we can give it to the NIH or the relevant institute to manage those funds. And we and the private sector partners have really little to no decision-making role with what happens to that, other than to say the money is going to go to support this cancer research program. And so we call those NIH-managed programs. At the other extreme, we have programs where the FNIH will keep all of the funds, will create a governance panel of government, academic, industry, and patient nonprofit organization scientists to make the scientific decisions. But we're the ones who will disperse those funds out to the academic institution or the small business who's going to actually run the tests or run the trial. And these are FNIH-managed projects. We have, as I say, a variety of hybrid models in between. So let me just give you one quick example of how one of these partnerships, what it covers. It's called the Accelerating Medicines Partnership, or AMP. It's now 4 years into a 5-year, $350 million pre-competitive research initiative. one of the most important decisions you have to make is to what degree is the research pre-competitive. And by that I mean this is not product development. This is generating basic scientific understanding that is going to enhance product development. And it's a case where all the data, it's very important, goes out into the public domain as rapidly and broadly as possible, so we raise all boats. So the partners do not get a preferential economic advantage. They're in this because they realize that if they put money into this, it's ultimately going to result in better, faster development of drugs for type 2 diabetes, for example. This started back in 2014, and the original design was to do specific research initiatives in Alzheimer's, type 2 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, and lupus. And beginning this year, we added an effort in Parkinson's disease because the first three were so effective. The problem is this. The problem is that all too often, the targets, which are the genes, the proteins, the molecular entities along a disease pathway that a drug is supposed to affect, are chosen by companies with insufficient understanding of the basic biology behind them. So we're not quite sure, in the end, sometimes, why the drug does what it does or fails. And this was resulting in extensive failures at the clinical trial stage of developing these drugs. So in the early days of developing a drug, you go from spending a few million on testing initial hypotheses, and through maybe animal testing, you're into the tens of millions of dollars. And once you go into human beings, the risk goes up and so does the cost, $100 to $200 million a year. And too many of these were failing in that clinical trial stage, not only when a lot of money was being spent, but many years had gone by, and the reason was that they weren't working, and the companies couldn't figure out why, because the original target that they had selected was not well understood. There's a whole bunch of new technologies that help us understand these targets better, but like I mentioned, this is part of that tsunami of data. So how does everybody get together and figure out what the right approach is in these various diseases? We ran a development process, and it really started with the first three diseases where the dark blue box in the middle is, but we have a way that people can submit a concept. There's an executive committee that approves whether a program should go forward. And then we did a very interesting thing. So we at the FNIH brought together the industry scientists, the NIH scientists, key academic opinion leaders, and representatives from the patient organizations, and we got together and we put together what we call a white paper level description of what that particular research initiative ought to look like. And then we turned around and we asked the companies, we had 10 to 13 companies who were interested in participating in this, which of these things would you like to invest in? And they chose that. And then we kicked the academics out of the room, and we sat down with just the companies and NIH to do that. Now, why did we do that? Because those academics were going to need to be competing for NIH grants that could go to them to do some of this work. And NIH has strict conflicts of interest rules around that. So removing them from the process before we got down to a detailed plan was absolutely necessary. We sat down, we came up with this detailed research plan. That became the basis for agreements between the FNIH and the companies, so the companies knew exactly what they were getting into. These were time-based programs with precise budgets, with go, no-go milestones. If you don't reach this at this point, you can take your money and walk, those kinds of things, because that's the way industry runs. And this has been an incredibly effective program, and one that is extremely well regarded. I won't go through all this, but this is an example of the variety of things that were chosen. It's very different in each disease area because each disease and the state of knowledge in each disease area is very different. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And here you can see who the partners are that ended up self-selecting out to each of these disease areas. And you can see here that these are a variety of life sciences companies. There's even a computing company here. Verily is the life sciences arm of Google, and they're providing a really important information technology platform that's being used to figure out Parkinson's disease and how the targets in that could be better characterized. We made some policy decisions as well, and these are important when you're setting this out. What are the ground rules of the start? So in this case, we decided the research will be pre-competitive. Data will be shared broadly and quickly. We gave people up to 6 months while the data is being QA'd and QC'd to take a look at it, but then it goes right out into public databases that are available to everyone. And we said that as part of this, during this initial period, there's no preemptive patenting around anything that we find. But once the data is out there, let the patenting, let the competition begin. Whatever you do with that data, whether you're a small company or Pfizer, is available to you to make whatever inventions you wish. So with that, I will stop, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you all.
Thanks. So that's a really interesting organization and an interesting model for us to think about in the energy sphere, which has many similarities but also differences. So now we've heard a little bit about the two big ideas, and we've asked a third speaker to join us, Rita Baron, who's kind of on the front lines managing R&D for DOE, to reflect on these ideas as well as the broader question of partnerships. So as was mentioned, she's at Idaho National Lab, where she directs the Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear. Before she joined INL, she was at Westinghouse, and she has a bachelor's from MIT in Material Science and Engineering, and a PhD as well in that field from the University of Michigan. And thanks for coming out. Sorry about the weather, but I'm sure you're looking forward to getting back to some less humid climate. So thanks for coming.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It is my pleasure to share with you a little bit of the success that we've had with private-public partnerships, working with industries and the national labs. Want to give you a little bit about the advantages of working in nuclear energy. You can see some of the benefits here in this graphic, but also a few facts here. There's a lot of energy density in nuclear power. Back when I worked at Bettis Atomic Power Lab almost 20 years ago, I had the fortune of visiting Newport News Shipyard, where they were constructing the USS Ronald Reagan, CVN-76. And I was able to, at the time, walk into what was going to house the nuclear reactor, so the reactor compartment, which was several stories tall. And I looked up, and I thought, wow. And at the time, I was working on nuclear fuel, which, if you're not familiar, is really, really small. I thought, what I work on is this small, and it's going to power this behemoth 14-story plus aircraft carrier. That's pretty remarkable. That's the energy density that nuclear provides us. It also, in 2016, provided 805 billion with a B kilowatt hours, which was enough to provide power to 73 million homes. So it provides a lot of energy in a small amount of space. So Secretary of Energy Perry, said early stage investment in advanced nuclear technology will support a strong domestic industry now and into the future. It's an important step to ensure our nation continues to benefit from this clean, resilient source of electricity. So worldwide, there's 450 reactors operating in 30 countries. And there's a test at the end, so if you can read this, bonus points. But I just want to show you as an example of what the different demographics are. There are 58 reactors under construction today. Who can tell me how many are in the United States? Bingo, it's 2. Was 4, it's 2 now. So that means the remainder are overseas. China, Russia, India, they're leading the pack here. We have worldwide 17,500 reactor years of experience. This is a very mature technology. A lot of capacity, and we provide 15% of the world's electricity with this energy source. Okay, so as David mentioned before coming to the INL, I worked for Westinghouse. And I did do a lot of work with the national labs. I was in research and development and would do some work with Oak Ridge National Lab, with Idaho National Lab, Argonne National Lab. One of the issues that I would face repeatedly is it was difficult to do work with the labs. I was working for a for-profit company. I needed to stick to budget. I needed to stick to a schedule, and I needed to get results to move on to the next project. And it was a little bit difficult. Historically, it has not been easy to work with the DOE labs. That's been on purpose. The DOE labs were created for a specific mission early on, but I will tell you that mission has changed over the past decade. And DOE recognizes, especially in the nuclear energy space, that industry is leading, and the labs will support that leadership. And so part of why GAIN was launched was it takes a long time to get concepts to market. We heard a little bit about that from Rick and from David. The facilities to do this type of research are very expensive. The capabilities, as I mentioned, at the labs have not been easily accessible. And then some innovators, many of whom are within my GAIN developer community, have never worked with the regulatory body in the United States, which is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So those were some of the issues. So what we do in GAIN is provide financial, technical, and regulatory assistance to commercial entities, so small businesses, private industries that are working in advanced nuclear technology space, with assistance to create a private-public partnership. We want to achieve 3 goals. So I already talked about how the U.S. is not on top right with respect to nuclear energy leadership. We want to get back on top, and it's not too late. So I'm delivering good news to you. It's not too late. But we want to help industry and DOE lead global technology commercialization. We talked about how many reactors are being built in the United States, 2. Part of that reason is that along that process, we didn't bring our supply chain with us. It had been 4 decades since we built a new reactor in this country. And so we want to make sure that we bring the supply chain with us as we're developing new reactors and wanting to deploy them. So we want to enable global industrial leadership in that sense too. And then finally, we want to make sure in the United States we have an optimized domestic energy portfolio. So that includes utilities that exist today, that includes all of you as an end user of electricity as well. So what we do, and I've given you some details here for the geeks in the room, myself included. What we do is we connect developers of technology to the capabilities in the DOE labs. At a very high level, that includes modeling and simulation, cross-cutting design support, an interface to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, base reactor and fuel cycle research and development programs, and my favorite, experimentation. At an even higher level, that includes modeling and simulation, access to expertise. World-renowned experts work at these labs. We provide you access to those folks. And we provide you access to very unique facilities. It is not easy to get time in a nuclear reactor to test a fuel, to test a new material, to test a new thermal hydraulic concept. We provide you that access. So I was really pleased to see Ryan Fitzpatrick from Third Way here today. Third Way, along with USNIC, the Nuclear Industry Council, has helped us develop this advanced nuclear directory. So for those of you who are wondering if there's anybody in your district that works in this arena, you can take a look at this directory. We've created it for 2 main reasons. One is for all of you, so that you understand why it's important to provide support for funding in the nuclear energy R&D space. And the other is to provide investors information on how much activity is occurring in the space. Anyone want to guess how much capital investment is available in the clean energy space? I'll give you a hint, it's billions. $600 billion of capital is waiting to be invested. And so we provided this for those that don't know where to go to invest their money. Here's a place to start. Participation in this directory is voluntary, so it is by no means comprehensive, but it includes developers, the national labs, as well as folks from the supply chain. And so with that, just want to share with you some of the work that we've done also, again, with Third Way in depicting what nuclear looks like in the future. You've got a remote community in the Arctic where we can now with the help of nuclear reactors, envision living. I like to think of this as downtown DC, right next to a metro center, where we can power an urban area with reactors. We can live in the desert, thanks to nuclear technology. And then also, we can have data centers that are powered solely by nuclear as their primary electric source. So with that, I know that we'll be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So I think we'll go straight to questions. I'm going to start with one myself, but we have a mic out there, and I know we're running short on time. So let me just start with a question, then we'll invite anybody in the audience who has one to share. Let me just start with Rita. I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on what do you see now as the big challenges in terms of building partnerships that Congress could do something about?
So it sounds like a canned answer, but it would be more funding. Over the past 2 years, we have impacted over 100 different companies in this space, most of whom are small businesses. So if we could have additional funding to help these companies get through learning loops and commercialize their technology faster, that would be a huge benefit. The budget that we currently have is quite small. We offer financial awards every quarter now. By the way, the next deadline is July 31st, so if you or somebody in your district wants to apply for funding, gain.inl.gov is the website. But they're every quarter, but they're small amounts. But it's work that cannot be done elsewhere in the country. And so that's the beauty of working with the national labs.
Great, thanks. Questions? Yeah, Adam? Thanks. Let me just repeat that for we're taping this for online. So the question is whether there's a demand for donors to support DOE lab activities.
Send them my way. Billions, we're good with that.
So, I mean, I guess I wonder in the nuclear area, I think there are a number of well-known philanthropists interested in this. And do you sense that there is a hunger to connect with the labs?
There is more. It's more so to connect with a end developer, but clearly Gain connects developers to the labs, which in the end helps to commercialize technology faster. Currently, I would say that those types of investors, philanthropists, are working directly with companies, but I suspect that if there was a foundation, they would go to that foundation to support it.
Yeah, I think the point is right on. There we go. Okay. So I think the point is right on, that it's really about connecting those investors with some performer, some manufacturer, et cetera, and the lab through licensing arrangements, things like that. I think that's where that capital can be utilized to license lab-developed technologies and commercialize them. Doesn't necessarily apply to the project we're involved in now, but we're always looking and looking for that next generation, or that 2 generations ahead kind of capability. And those are the things that take a lot of time, a lot of money to do. And I would say that it's that kind of 3-way scenario where you're going to access that capital and make use of it for a lab-developed technology.
Thanks. In the back? Sorry, in the back, sorry. We'll get you next. Go ahead. Yeah.
My name is Sarah. I'm from the National Renewable Energy Lab, and we actually have 2 examples of foundations that we work with who have set up programs. One is with the Wells Fargo Foundation. It's a $20 million 5-year program where we work. We have an agreement to commercialize technologies, or ACT agreement with them, where we work with them to select startup companies to commercialize technology. So they fund us to work with a small company
Great, thanks very much. So go ahead, you have your question.
My question's for David. I'm Zach Bates from the Department of Energy. I'm interested about the foundation, about donors, and what kind of diversity you see as far as who donates to the foundation, and what maybe is some diversity in the type of outcomes or deliverables that they're looking for.
So
So,
most,
I'm just going to repeat it. Yeah,
Yeah.
asking David a little bit about the donors and what they're looking for.
so most of our donors are corporate donors. It's hard to develop individual donors for what we do for a couple of reasons. One is that they tend to say, well, the government, this is, money that's being added onto the government should do what it does, and I'll go do what I do and found my own foundation. The other thing is a lot of individual donors, they're looking to get their name on a hospital building and so forth, and that's not what we're about. But it doesn't mean we don't get some individual donors. We've had a number of them, and we actually have a program now developed over the last 3 years to try and increase that. Most of our funding comes from either companies, pharmaceutical companies, or from, in some cases, other foundations, patient foundations. And that's where the majority of our funding comes from. They do have different points of view, but ultimately, we go after them not around some general, ask, like just give us money and we'll figure out what to do with it, but around a very specific program. We're going to figure out what are the best indicators of disease progression in Parkinson's disease, and which of those could be used in clinical trials to help develop new medications for Parkinson's. So the Michael J. Fox Foundation knows exactly what they're getting into. And I find that developing an actual research agenda is very helpful to figure out whether for companies or for nonprofits to be involved. Because the other thing in the pharmaceutical industry is not every company is in every disease. They're all over the place. And so what appeals to one company may be a big yawn for another.
Thanks, yeah, in the front here.
I'm Eagles Millworks. I'm co-founder of a nonprofit in Seattle that works in the food, energy, water, trying to help entrepreneurs launch companies. Delighted to hear why you're interested in forming more partnerships. Wanted to ask about the small business voucher idea, whether that's a concept that we could expand beyond DOE labs and to other laboratories as well as universities, because a lot of them have a lot of R&D infrastructure that can be very helpful to small companies, startups, etc. Secondly, I just have a general thing about competitiveness. Our country has lost one technology after another technology to our overseas competitors after we pioneered the development of it. And I'm just wondering if you have any comment on how, from the scale-up standpoint, how we keep the jobs here, the manufacturing jobs here, the distribution jobs, etc., as opposed to kind of giving it up to some pretty obvious other countries who grab our technology and exploit it for their own economic competitiveness.
So 2 questions there, one about expanding small business vouchers to other agencies, and the second on competitiveness. Let me take the first one, and actually the real authority sitting behind you, Steve and Ezel. There are some states that offer small business vouchers. There are a number of countries that do it, so it could be done on a much broader basis. Obviously, there are maybe some jurisdictional issues here up on the Hill as to which agencies respond to which committees, but it certainly is an idea that could be broadened. On competitiveness, maybe, Rita, do you want to tackle that one?
Sure, I'll do that one as well as the small business vouchers, specifically to universities. So part of what DOE NE does is provide 20% of its budget to universities. That's part of what it does. What we have done over the past 2 years is help inform the call for those proposals to universities with industry's needs. So there is some serendipity in that cycle where the universities get funding from the Department of Energy, but it's quite focused to help accelerate what industry needs to help commercialize some of their technology faster. So the universities certainly are reaping some of the benefits, I would say, in that sense. With respect to the competitiveness piece of it, I think part of what some of the folks in this room can help with is some of the policies that are related around export control and export of technology with respect to Part 810 and 123 agreements, because if we don't take a seat at that table, other countries will swoop in and sell their technologies, and whether it's their native mature technologies on their own or found elsewhere, we need to have a seat at the table as the United States.
And I can certainly recommend a large corpus of work that ITIF has put out on many competitiveness issues. Other questions? Yeah, Jetta.
Question for you, David. So can you talk about the role that you play that is different than what NIH plays in its normal everyday work? Like, why is it important that you are there? You kind of touched on it as it relates to the private sector, but what are those things that you do they cannot do?
Right.
So the question is, what can FNIH do that NIH can't do?
So one of the things is working more effectively with the company scientists and even with other government agencies than they can do on their own. So let's say we have a particular NIH is really, their bread and butter is basic research. They really are not very good at product development. They really don't know how to do it. And they're not, they don't have the regulatory expertise that FDA has. So let's say that we need a new biomarker, a new measure for improving our treatment of osteoarthritis. Today, up until recently, we've used something called joint space narrowing, which is you get an MRI and they see if there's this narrowing of the space between two of your bones. It's notoriously unreliable. And there are other new imaging measures and even some fluid protein measures that will give you a much better sense of whether the disease is progression or whether a drug is affecting the course of that disease and improving. But there are these different technologies, and the FDA ultimately has to decide whether they're going to accept that biomarker for use in approving new drugs. And you've got 5 or 10 pharmaceutical companies who actually know how that marker might be applied to the development of their drugs, because they're running tests in the lab, and they do things very differently than an academic in an institution does, who says, oh, I tested this on 200 people, and boy, this works. I'm publishing on this. This is validated. No, it isn't. You know, you need to now take this and bring it into a larger clinical population, and maybe the companies have those larger clinical populations. Well, NIH can't do that on their own. So I bring the partners together. I help design the study. We run the study. We'll do the contracts with the institutions that are going to do it and disperse the funds that are given to us by Pfizer and Merck and whomever. And we'll have the NIH scientists at the table and the FDA scientists, because they can tell you, you need to do this test and development to this level of specificity and robustness, or we're not going to be able to accept it for use in regulatory decision making. And that's a great example of the kind of the role that we play. And we make sure everything runs on time and the milestones get met, and the academics can't take their money and say, thank you very much for my grant, now I'm going to go do what I want with this and investigate something else that interests me, because we're dispersing those funds. And NIH has really not quite the power to do that when they give a grant. So that's just one example.
Thanks. So let's take one more and then we will wrap up. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm Bob Hershey. I'm a consultant. What kinds of things are you doing in holding meetings online to get the funding together for your efforts and getting an economic consensus online?
Who is that directed to? Is that to the?
To everybody. So the question was, what kinds of things are we doing online in terms of bringing together funders and convincing them to fund our efforts? Is that a fair statement? Go ahead.
So part of what we do is trying to reach out to investors. So for example, last December I spoke at a deep decarbonization symposium where Anthropocene Institute, among others, Pritzker Fund, et cetera, were in attendance and shared with them the activity that's going on in the advanced nuclear energy space. We also have a lot of information on our website that we invite folks to come and look at. And then we do anticipate having a workshop as well, trying to reach out to stakeholders in the investment community to share with them the activities that are going on.
I would say very little, but to explain why, we're always marketing current and new ideas, and putting ourselves in places where we can potentially have those conversations, not necessarily doing it online. If we got to a point where we were actively looking for capital, that's something that we might consider. That's something we just haven't done up till now. And we would be very targeted, I would think, in kind of knowing the lay of the land, knowing who we want to go to. But I hear what you're saying, trying to open it up to all kinds of possible investors. That's not fitting in our business model right now, but it's an interesting question.
We do an awful lot online. In fact, I'd say most of it because, first of all, let's face it, we're selling to scientists. And they want to see the data. And they want to ask questions about the data, and they want to see it graphically represented and so forth. And then we're usually trying to talk to multiple companies at once. And they want to ask questions and bounce ideas off each other. So a lot of that takes place through WebEx. That's, I'd say, primarily how we operate. It's rare that we'll go like on site to a company and sit down with them, but we've done that as well. But I'd say we do a lot of it online. And of course, the other really important thing is where you put your data. So it's got to be accessible online.
Great. So these are two interesting ideas. I hope they get some traction. They need to be further developed. We need your inputs and thoughts. It's a complicated landscape of innovation. It's a complicated administrative landscape within the DOE. So these are going to have to fit in and evolve in that context. And we would welcome your thoughts on either ideas. And with that, let me thank Rick and David and Rita for sharing their ideas with us today. Thank Levi and his colleagues on the Hill for setting up this space for us and developing the ideas. And thank you all for turning out. What a great turnout for this event. And with that, I think we'll adjourn. Thanks.
All right.